Listen to this. You may have had a bad image of this character because of what we saw in X-Men: The Last Stand. But believe me, this character is one of the most physically powerful in Marvel. The villains of this saga are also on their way to being remade. Magneto, Mr. Sinister, Mystique, Apocalypse, and yes, Juggernaut too. Today we will talk about if he was truly depicted in the movies just as the origins in the comics or not. And before we smash through the rest, please hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on our latest videos. One small click for you, but a huge deal for us. Thanks! So let's discuss background of Juggernaut. The name is Cain Marko, and he's a stepbrother of Charles Xavier. From an early age, he generated a strong hatred and envy towards his stepbrother. Charles was his father's favorite. This resentment led Marko to leave home to become a mercenary, until a demon named Sidorak gave him enormous muscular size and height, measuring 8.9 feet and turning him into the Juggernaut that we know today. Later, he would obtain his characteristic difficult-to-remove helmet that would block the entry of his stepbrother's telepathic powers. All this together has led to the villain being very difficult to defeat, taking all the X-Men together at the same time to stop him, except for an X-Men: The Last Stand, but we'll talk about that later. Now, let's talk about first time he popped up. The Juggernaut prototype. Even though his arch enemies are the X-Men, Juggernaut's first appearance was actually in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, an 80s animated series where the Wallcrawler made several crossovers with other Marvel characters, including the X-Men, teaming up to defeat Juggernaut. Juggernaut for that episode was like being something like the villain of the week, and through this small sample of the X-Men in an animation, spawned a whole animated series starring the X-Men team. The production of one of the best superhero series of all time was carried out. X-Men, the animated series. The Unstoppable Juggernaut. The pilot was what we needed for Saban Entertainment to develop the series of mutants, where we would meet Cain Marko again in the 8th episode of the first season, The Unstoppable Juggernaut, bringing us a version that would encompass everything that would make the character iconic, an improved and more imposing version of the brown suit that we saw in previous installments, a mocking attitude toward his rivals, and total arrogance that could be a defense mechanism to shield the low self-esteem that the character had during his childhood alongside Professor X. At first, we simply see him as a simple thug who robs a bank, but later his intentions become more malevolent when he destroys the X-Mansion. Fortunately, Charles was on a mission with the Savage Land, but this is another story. And even though his plans as a bank robber failed, in later episodes he would find excuses to constantly return. He would often be an ally of several villains against the X-Men, only to be able to punish his stepbrother Charles. But unfortunately, everything has to come to an end. And this came in 2006, the year in which X-Men: The Last Stand was released, and the year in which they brought us the Wrestling Juggernaut. The end of a saga that had been a golden goose for Fox was about to arrive, so what they needed was a super final fight, and so they brought several characters that were missing in the other installments, such as Beast, Kitty Pryde, and yes, Juggernaut. And before we get into the details, one thing needs to be clarified. The film was originally set to be directed by Matthew Vaughn, the same director of Kick-Ass, the Kingsman Saga, and the upcoming installment, X-Men: First Class. But for creative reasons, he stepped down from the position and was replaced by the film's current director, Brett Ratner. Vinnie Jones, an actor and former football player, was hired by Vaughn for the role of Juggernaut, as Vaughn had previously worked with the actor, and within his hiring, there was an idea about what he wanted to do with the character, which according to Jones, "It was a great role and great script, and Juggernaut was a great character. I signed up for 3 of them, and that will show you how serious I was about it." Brett Ratner basically dissolved the character. It wasn't the same Juggernaut as I signed on for. They took his storyline away. They'd taken his character away, his dialogue. I had 2 big meetings with Brett about it, and he said, yeah, it's coming. They're writing stuff for you as we speak. And it never happened. When Ratner came along, things changed drastically. Jones claims that much of his involvement in the film was removed, making him last half the shoot in his trailer. So aside from the cuts Ratner made, we don't know how much he creatively interfered with Juggernaut, but the material he left for the film didn't sit well with the character at all. First mistake they made with the character Juggernaut is being with an abnormal height and muscles. He is easily differentiated from any human being, but instead, they simply put a muscle suit with a helmet on his head and with his torso almost naked, making him look more like a wrestler than a Juggernaut. This takes away quite a bit of the threatening and powerful image that he had in previous versions. Very similar to what happened with Bane in Batman and Robin in '97, and with Killer Croc in Suicide Squad in 2016. And to add to that, the helmet shows his face more than normal, looking more like a boxing helmet. Second mistake, the character not only looks goofy, but at times acts goofy too. We know that Juggernaut is not the smartest of villains in the world, and that he is someone who acts out of anger and impulse, but even so, the version we saw in the animated series managed to have a little charisma. From time to time, he would tell a joke or make fun of the X-Men, showing that he did not take things so seriously, but instead, Jones' Juggernaut, instead of being funny, was a bit cringe. He always looked frustrated, angry, looking more like a crying child who throws tantrums. And of course, this is not helped by the infamous phrase,
"I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!"
This line was not originally planned in the script, but was later added by Ratner with extra recordings, based on a parody video of the X-Men animated series that was circulating on the internet in 2005.
"I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!"
And finally, Jones ended up embodying one of the most criticized versions of any villain in cinema. And although the actor could have had a chance to redeem himself, since he was invited to make a cameo in Deadpool and Wolverine, the actor decided that it was better to leave things as they are, saying, "It's such a drama putting that suit on mentally and physically." Well, who knows how everything would have turned out, but yes, sometimes it's better to leave things alone. The intention was to put those versions of characters to bed, finally, by having them appear in Deadpool and Wolverine as cameos. Just like Blade, Human Torch, Elektra, and so on. We received the Vinnie Jones version of Juggernaut without Vinnie Jones. And yeah, that version had his head removed by X-23. Another disappointment, unfortunately, but the last we'll see of that version, thank God. The redemption of Juggernaut. Many years after the end of the X-Men saga, the mutants managed to redeem themselves thanks to a new trilogy in the 2010s. And thanks to Wade Wilson, the new Deadpool movies not only managed to get a few laughs, but they brought back several characters who had not been treated well in the past, such as Colossus, Gambit, and of course, Juggernaut. The movie needed a villain who could cause a big headache for the X-Force, so who better than the unstoppable Juggernaut? Thank God this time they were smarter and had more budget to make a 100% CGI Juggernaut to be able to bring a live-action, a villain intimidating enough without having to deal with the physical limitations of a real human being. But due to budgetary issues, there was no possibility of hiring another actor. So the team came up with the idea of having Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool himself, lend his voice to the character, while the film's director, David Lynch, did the facial capture and motion capture of the character, thus achieving one of the most epic characters in the film, and thus causing one of the most memorable fights in the Deadpool saga, Juggernaut and his old rival Colossus.
That's how we do it in Mother Russia.
And to add another fact, the director of the film has stressed that Juggernaut is still alive after the fight. So he leaves the door open for us to see this imposing Juggernaut again in future installments. So now tell us, what do you think? Do you think we'll see this Juggernaut again in future Marvel installments? Or will they reboot him the same way they rebooted the X-Men? Which version do you think really did him justice? Drop a comment on this video, and if you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button and tell us what movies or series you'd like us to deep dive into next. This video is made by movie fans for movie fans.